Welcome back to season 4 of
A Couple of Multiples.
The Reality of Dissociative Identity Disorder. Did you know that according to a recent Harvard study, 93% of people living with DID are initially misdiagnosed by mental health professionals? That's a staggering statistic, and it's exactly why we're here.
This season, we're diving deep into clinical interventions. What actually helps when it comes to recognizing and treating dissociative disorders? Whether you're a mental health provider, a supporter, or someone navigating life with multiplicity, this season is for you.
Thank you for being here. Please share this episode with a friend, your therapist, psychiatrist, or colleague. Together, we can help improve access to accurate diagnoses and effective, compassionate care.
And most importantly, remember that every system is different. What works for one may not work for another, and that's okay. Your journey is valid, your healing is real, and we're so glad you're hanging out with
A Couple of Multiples. This episode is brought to you by Donna Earle, a licensed professional counselor and certified clinical trauma professional.
She's the founder of To Life Counseling in Southlake, Texas, where she helps individuals ages 17 and up heal trauma, navigate identity, and reclaim inner peace. Her trauma-informed approach includes EMDR, parts work, strengths-based therapy, TBRI, and CBT.
She's passionate about honoring the resilience of the human spirit, one story at a time.
The Institute for Creative Mindfulness, ICM, soon to be the Creative Mindfulness Network, is the only EMDR therapy training program founded by an openly plural clinician, EMDR therapy author Dr. Jamie Plus Marich.
We felt so validated when we were able to authentically participate in this training as Garden System. And although grounded in the EMDR International Association for Curriculum Standards, ICM elevates the values of lived experience and the expressive arts in their training programs.
They actively work with shattering the stigma around dissociative responses. Please visit www.instituteforcreativemindfulness.com to learn more. Welcome to another impactful episode with Drew
and Garden System,
A Couple of Multiples.
The reality of dissociative identity disorder.
Today, we are deeply grateful to have Healing My Parts here to talk with us about the unique and complex relationship between eating disorders and multiplicity.
Monika Ostroff LICSW CEDS-S is the Executive Director of the Multi-Service Eating Disorders Association, MEDA, a national nonprofit dedicated to providing equitable access to compassionate care for everybody. Prior to joining MEDA, Monika directed several residential, partial hospital, and intensive outpatient programs, and also maintained a successful private practice.
With over 25 years of experience in the field, Monika is the co-author of Anorexia Nervosa, A Guide to Recovery, and a contributing author to Self-Harm Behavior and Eating Disorders. She has presented at national conferences, taught at the university level, and been featured in media outlets and podcasts. Her work is grounded in a trauma-informed social justice framework and a strong commitment to HAES-aligned compassionate care for all.
Monika's passion for this work is deeply personal, rooted in her own lived experience with severe and enduring anorexia nervosa. That journey continues to inform her clinical perspective and her drive to create more inclusive, affirming systems of support.
In addition to her role at MEDA, Monika is the creator of Healing My Parts, a podcast, Substack, and Instagram platform exploring dissociative identity disorder and trauma through the lens of a therapist navigating her own healing. The project offers insights, tools, and empowering conversations with systems, providers, and healers working to destigmatize dissociation and highlight the brilliance within one of the most misunderstood conditions.
Well, welcome, Monika. We are so excited to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And hello, everybody.
Yay. Well, let's get right to it.
Yes.
So, what sparked your interest in supporting people with eating disorders?
Well, actually, nearly dying from my own. Right. Like, I mean, not uncommon for people who work in the eating disorder field to have their own history. I had what is today considered a severe and enduring eating disorder, meaning, the projection was I would never get better. Surprise. When I actually hit a point where I was really stable with my eating disorder, the first thing I wanted to do was never talk about food, bodies, or anything ever again. But about probably not that long after, within 6 months of that, in reflecting over the numerous hospitalizations, the numerous treatment experiences that I had that were honestly pretty awful, I wanted to begin to affect change in the field. I wanted it to be a more strengths-based, empowering place where people could begin to learn how to trust their own intuition and their own internal voice and not be so pathologized or relegated to behaviorally acting out, air quotes. And it's been a journey, right, for 25 years to be involved in that. And I've done lots of different things and I think have had an impact, and have really also been looking at the fact that, relevant to this population in particular, so many people who have a severe and enduring eating disorder have DID or OSDD. That's not recognized.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So reignited passion in the field.
Yes, wanted to make things better.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So speaking of dissociative disorders, so what should clinicians specializing in eating disorders be on the lookout for so as not to miss a comorbid dissociative disorder?
Yeah. The hard thing is that most of the clinicians who treat eating disorders are so incredibly good at eating disorder symptomatology and the I'm going to call them the more, quote, run of the mill co-occurring disorders like depression and anxiety. Anxiety in particular and OCD are really high in folks who have eating disorders. But like everyone else in the world who has a therapeutic degree, nobody was trained in DID or OSDD.
Right.
So the importance is really being able to look for those clues that tell you that there's a dissociative disorder present, and also to really begin to learn what switching looks like.
Yes.
Because people just think, right, that we're all watching too much TV, and regular media doesn't do a particularly good job at depicting what a switch really looks like. And honestly, plenty of social media accounts don't either. There's a lot of the ones that are really dramatic and drastic. And while, yes, that happens for people, right, we know that the vast majority of switches are not that easy to spot because they are so subtle. And learning to look for those cues, whether it's changes in body language, slight intonation, preferences, points of view, all of those things can signify a switch. But also, for people in the eating disorders field in particular, where I see the light bulbs start going off in trainings is when I start talking about things like the clients you want to screen for are the ones who have long histories of many treatments that have never worked, medications and multiple trials and dosages that have never worked. This kind of long history where diagnostically the treatment team feels really confused about what's really happening. Somebody thinks it's this disorder, somebody else thinks it's that disorder. And really looking at those types of things, or that mismatch, right, that we see where somebody seems to be doing great in their life outside, but they're regressing in therapy, or vice versa. Somebody whose history doesn't match their symptom picture in either direction. Like, they're reporting that they had this amazing time growing up in this really functional family, and yet their symptoms look like somebody who has had really severe prolonged trauma, or somebody who has a horrific history and they look all put together and buttoned up. There's so many different little cues that folks need to really kind of pay attention to.
So
yeah,
true.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, thinking about the subtlety of switching, like the slight changes in facial expressions. And episode 1 of this season is all about recognizing dissociation. So you might want to head back and check out episode 1 if you haven't already, to look for those clues. Different selves have different eating disorders, even, or the symptomology is going to show up differently depending on who's fronting. So there's a lot of pieces, I think, that can show itself for sure.
Yeah. And your podcast is actually one that when I'm doing trainings for folks in the eating disorders field, I always send to get that information, because it's so important.
Thank you. Yeah, that's awesome. That's why we're here doing this, so that we can recognize it sooner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That leads wonderfully into our next question. How does having dissociative identity disorder impact having an eating disorder?
Oh, lots of different ways. So that's one of those, if we are really thorough, do you guys have 5 hours for that for that question? So number of different ways. I mean, number one is something that you mentioned, right? So if you have a complex dissociative disorder like DID or OSDD, you can have different parts that have different eating disorders, which can be really confusing for clinicians treating it, right? Because you can present one way this day or this week or this month and a completely different way another time. And depending on your age, I think sometimes that can get pathologized differently and in ways that arguably are not that helpful. Also, like, eating disorders are dissociative by nature. So it's not really uncommon to find that somebody with an eating disorder would have DID or OSDD. Like 40% of folks with DID or OSDD have an eating disorder. And conversely, 90% of folks with eating disorders have a trauma history, with at least 50% of them meeting criteria for PTSD. So the overlap is huge.
Yeah, so it's definitely something to be on the lookout for.
Yeah. And realistically, if you look at what happens when we are helping somebody heal from their eating disorder, and we're looking at normalizing eating patterns and eating foods, et cetera, really that refeeding process is a somatic re-experiencing of trauma, particularly sexual trauma. So you're going to see an increase in dissociation when that refeeding process happens. And I think sometimes clinicians and support providers in like residential treatment centers who are not well versed or haven't been exposed to it can get frustrated and believe that a client is, quote, resistant to treatment, right? Or you'll hear statements like doesn't really want to get better, or is, quote, attention seeking. I'm hoping that this terminology is like extinguishing, but it still happens. And they're not realizing that there are parts of self that are reacting to that experience of having something in their body they don't want there, that they feel really trapped and there's no way out, and that they don't have choices and they're losing autonomy. And of course, that's going to be really triggering to somebody with a trauma history. And the person who's experiencing it has no idea that that's what's going on.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So being able to help that person have some orienting skills to, like, right here, right now, you're okay. And the experience, that physical sensation of having food in your stomach is actually okay, albeit uncomfortable for you. And how do we help that person be as comfortable as possible?
Yeah, I always think of my own therapist who says that eating is grounding. And when you're dissociative and you don't want to be in your body, you don't want to be grounded, like that's a scary thing, to be in your body.
Yeah. And I think the vast majority of folks with eating disorders are not in their bodies. So even when they're eating, they've learned to just kind of cut things off under the chin. Like, I don't want to know what's below.
Right. So what are some reasons why people who have experienced trauma develop eating disorders or disordered eating?
Bazillion reasons. One is that if you think about what an eating disorder does, so many people who have trauma histories are obviously incredibly disempowered. They didn't have a lot of choice in their life. And everyone needs to know that they have the ability to affect change in their life, right? And one thing that eating disorders do is you can set a goal for yourself around food, weight, your body, and then you can create a plan for how you're going to get there. You can map it all out. It's really predictable, and you can start to see results and things changing. And for somebody who is in a situation that they can't change, that they feel trapped in, the feeling that you get around achieving a goal and feeling empowered is really liberating and pretty incredible, and a beautiful distraction and rescuing from the despair that you live in. So it makes a lot of sense. Not only that, but when you think about all of the time that goes into planning what you're going to eat, when you're going to eat it, what excuses you're going to make when you go to your friend's house, like, no, I ate at my parents' house. When you're at parents' house, like, no, I ate at my friend's house. How long I'm going to work out to work it off, all that stuff fills your head all day long.
Yeah.
That means you don't have time to think about what's really happening in your life.
Yeah, it's
And if you
consuming.
yeah, you think about like dissociation in general, right? Like we're trying to separate ourselves from what's happening. And these are some of the ways that eating disorders do. But also, when you are not well nourished, regardless of body shape or size, you don't experience your emotions in full. They're muted. So it's not that some people will say, oh, if you're not well nourished, you can't feel your feelings. It's like, well, no, it's more like where regular folks who are well nourished would experience a rainbow of colors. You have like muted shades of gray. You still know that you're sad. It's just a different level than somebody else might experience. So there's a lot. I always feel like I'm selling an eating disorder when I talk about this stuff. It's like, oh, that sounds great. I don't have to feel anything. But of all people who are so hurt and in so much despair, and honestly, like food is available to most people. So you don't have to pay tons of money for treatment or for drugs, for example. Manipulating how much you're moving your body or how much you are not eating is often accessible.
So true. Mm-hmm. All right. What are some common eating struggles those with dissociative identity disorder face?
The most common one is interesting because it often gets diagnosed as an eating disorder, but it's actually not an eating disorder. So it's that thing that I'm sure you guys will recognize this. It's sort of, I'll give it from the DID perspective, right? You know, you get up in the morning and you have a little that's like, I really want brownies. I want brownies now. Can we have brownies for breakfast? Let's have brownies for breakfast. I want brownies for breakfast. And they, they're headed towards the brownies. And then you've got other parts of you that are like, we are not having brownies for breakfast.
Yeah.
I planned oatmeal yesterday. And somebody else who's like, we are absolutely not having oatmeal. I've started a different eating plan. We are having eggs. They're hard, like whatever it is. And you get in this sort of like space where you're paralyzed until you figure out what it is that you're having. And many people will give in to the little, right? Because that's the one that's going to be vocal throughout the whole entire day. So rather than listen to the little cry or tantrum. Yeah, exactly.
Tantrums,
Yes,
man.
complete.
Can't walk in the grocery store without having a temper tantrum over the bakery section with the cookies.
Yes. So you're like, you know what? Brownies for breakfast. It's like there's eggs, there's flour in it. It's like it's well rounded somehow. We're having brownies for breakfast. So you have brownies. And then you're thinking everything is okay. And then something else might happen where either another part switches in because it's angry.
Yes.
It didn't want that. And so it might say, well, we had that, but we need to have something that I personally consider to be more well-rounded, and it makes a smoothie. So then the next thing you know, you're having a smoothie. But then, there's a teen part that's like, are you effing kidding me? Like, so-and-so got a brownie. You got your smoothie. I want my freaking chips. So then the chips show up.
Relatable.
Right. Like, so the whole day is literally, the person having this, that, and the other thing, like all day long. And invariably, I see those folks get a diagnosis of binge eating disorder, but that is not what binge eating disorder looks like.
No.
That is a communication problem, right? That is, it's a communication and collaboration problem in the system itself.
Yes,
correct.
Thank you. Yeah.
Not everybody can do or have what everybody wants to do or have the moment that they want it, but not everybody in the system knows that. Versus, bona fide binge eating disorder tends to look like a whole lot of restriction and then the binge on top of it. And there isn't different parts necessarily that are having an argument about what you're going to eat when.
Right.
Right. So that I think is sort of unique to dissociative disorders and gets really confusing for providers when people come in for care.
Yeah, because not every self remembers what another self ate, or they get upset because you ate
Yep.
my cookie and I was saving that for me. So now I have to have another cookie because you ate my cookie.
Well, you know
Yeah.
what happens? They find evidence,
Yeah, that too.
wrappers, what's in the garbage, what's missing from the fridge. And
Yes.
it's war.
Yeah.
It is war.
You actually will get the same issue or similar issue, I guess, with like parts of self that really love to move the body and exercise and parts of self that really hate it.
Yeah.
And if there is a part that enjoys a particular sport or working out in a particular way that lends itself to like delayed onset muscle soreness, other parts get super angry, and then it leads to different behaviors. Sometimes it can also lead to a lot of comfort eating. There's nothing wrong with comfort eating, but it can create a lot of internal havoc.
Yeah.
And then you'll
Absolutely.
get folks who will either go saying like, I have an exercise addiction, air quotes for that too, or I am doing too much emotional eating and I can't tolerate it. I need more. I'm out of control, when that's not really what's happening.
Yeah.
Communication.
Internal communication comes right back to it. So how does complex trauma affect eating behaviors?
In sort of all of the same kind of ways, I think that there many times food can be a part of trauma for somebody in childhood, whether it's withheld or it's forced upon somebody, or can be used in so many different ways. A person is going to develop aversions to food just based on the reality of the trauma, their specific trauma that they lived through. So there's that aspect that most people who don't have that type of trauma have to deal with. At the same time, they're still privy to all of the diet culture messaging, right? The $1.3 trillion wellness industry is like, follow my program and you will have the body of your dreams.
Yeah.
And it's not telling you that actually your body shape and size is determined by your genetics. And that is literally the number one thing that determines your shape and size. So calories in versus calories out is pretty much a myth, but we've all had that shoved down our proverbial throats forever. But it can lead people who are trying to escape themselves more rapidly to fall into diet patterns, whether that's the diet du jour of keto or paleo or whatever that happens to be. And they get an immediate sort of dissociative response of that high of feeling like they're accomplishing something, and they're more apt to go down that road potentially than someone else. Or the reality is, if they are genetically predisposed to an eating disorder, it is going to kick off that pathway sooner. We know that dietary restriction will ignite that pathway faster than anything else.
Yeah, some intense things, thinking of things that we have learned about, especially early childhood trauma with food, like, and the sensory issues that sometimes
Yep.
go along with it. Yeah.
When people often don't also understand what deprivation mindset or how deprivation mindset works and how that can lead into a binge restrict cycle, like, we're all biologically programmed that if we are deprived of something, when we are in the vicinity of it, we are going to sort of have more than we actually want, because the body's smart enough to try to save up for the next famine. Right. So I tell everybody in foundational trainings that, basically, if I tell all of you that you can't have a chocolate cake for a year, even if you hate chocolate cake, I guarantee you will see it everywhere. You'll notice your friends ordering it. You'll see it on TV. You'll notice it on menus. You'll see it on billboards. All of a sudden, chocolate cake is everywhere.
Yep.
And then when you eat it, even though you don't like it, I guarantee you'll have way more than you thought you were going to have. But that then leads into the binge restrict cycle, right? So you have more than people who are sensitive and are having feelings about that or feel shameful are going to go back to like atone for that, restrict, which then leads to the next binge. And you just kind of keep going around this circle until you eat an adequate amount for your body.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Trauma cycles.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and there's also this stuff that, I don't want to trigger folks, but there's also things that people will do as a result of like childhood sexual assault and childhood prolonged trauma, right? Which is avoiding foods of certain shapes and colors.
Yeah.
And that makes a lot of sense. Like very often what we're doing with food mirrors what's happening in our daily life. So if you're like too full of feelings, you're not going to have room for food. If you're also trying to avoid certain memories, food's shape and colors and avoiding those foods that have those shapes and colors are going to be key to avoiding some of those memories or trauma triggers for you. Likewise,
Yeah,
you
that's
can be so full of feelings, you need to get rid of them. So people who are like, whether they're purging or they're over exercising, it's what are you trying to move out of you and why? It works really metaphorically.
Yeah, I think that's really important information to know for some people, is that some of the behaviors is more about emotions and the body memories that go along with it.
Yeah.
I think of EMDR, like you're doing the tappers and you're doing the bilateral stimulation and you're trying to move those body sensations and emotions out of the body, and sometimes that results in a physical response like a burp or throwing up or something.
Yep. Yeah. I feel like so many folks don't understand how trauma is stored. I feel like we all have that the tagline, right, of the body keeps the score, without really having an appreciation for how that happens and how it's truly stored in our tissues.
Yeah, absolutely.
right. Okay, many systems show up to therapy with disordered eating and may not be aware of their trauma history or that they are a system. How can a clinician ensure they get to the root of these issues and gently help the client become aware?
That's a loaded question. It's because so much of that, right, depends on the client that's sitting in front of us. So, like for clinicians who are listening in particular, which will feel less exciting probably for folks with lived experience to hear this particular part, it really is tapping into your clinical intuition of how you're going to guide this conversation and how you're going to guide the person and system to discovery. But very often, clinically, you're going to see the disconnect between the behavior and the thought processes, and you begin to see things like there is a part that will hold, like, for example, intense restriction that becomes extremely dangerous. And in fact, that part has often been sort of sworn to silence to keep the secret. And it's trying to keep feelings at bay by starving itself, but also it's literally trying to take the secret to its grave. And when you intervene and you start sort of moving towards the refeeding component, which is aversive, it feels aversive to anybody experiencing it. I don't know anybody who's like, that was the best part of my treatment. It's not fun. Very often what you'll see are self-harming and suicidal ideation parts kick up immediately. They have the same goal, to maintain silence, and you can begin to show people the disparities in their points of view and their behaviors versus their goals. It's not that they're not treatment resistant, they're not crazy, they're not attention seeking. They are truly just compartmentalized so tightly that we need to start getting other parts of self involved in the process, so that things that we know how to do, right? Like you guys and us, in terms of like, how can we leverage the inner world to get these parts that are not able to eat because they're so stuck in trauma time someplace safe inside, and then leverage a part that is able to eat to come forward and take care of the body. And that's a skill set that I think clinicians need some training in, because that part is not necessarily intuitive.
That makes sense.
Yeah, like teaching things like the internal communication, like it's not intuitive, and learning to do things like system mapping and mapping out these parts, I think, are essential.
Yes. And being prepared for the fact too, right? Like when you start doing something like system mapping, for some people, it can send you right off into the bushes over the deep end.
Yeah.
That using that intuition, like what is this person able to tolerate, or this body in front of me, this system of parts. And how do I help them become more of, like Gianna's system, we'll talk about it being a symphony. So how can I get all of these instruments to play together?
Mm-hmm. That's a good analogy. I like that one. So, what are some common myths around eating disorders and dissociative disorders?
Well, the most common myth about dissociative disorders is we don't exist.
That's right. We're so rare.
We're
Oh,
so rare.
no,
I
we're
was
not.
there's so many different sort of like stereotypes, right? That people who have eating disorders are vain. Most of the folks who have eating disorders they're far from that. They
Right.
tend to be some of the most sensitive, compassionate, thoughtful people that I've ever worked with and ever had the pleasure of meeting. Because they're the ones that always remember like your birthday when no one else does, or they remember that you have a difficult day when no one else does. They're always also last on their own list. And they tend to be super, super sensitive to their own feelings and to, I'm going to call it criticism, can also be like, constructive feedback can be perceived as really devastating. I don't think that's a myth, but I think that's a reality of the makeup of many folks who suffer from eating disorders.
Mm-hmm.
It was mind blowing to me to see, folks who will talk very quickly about there's a subsection of folks with eating disorders who, quote, will never get better, right? I think we hear that about DID as well. And how are we defining better anyway? Like the big debate, which is it should be how the person defines it for themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would be the best way to define it. I think the fact that we're not doing, almost no one is doing any screening for DID and OSDD in the context of eating disorders.
It's so needed.
It's really frustrating because so many people are suffering. And then we have that split in care, right? Where you have folks who treat eating disorders who say, oh, I'm sorry, I don't treat trauma. And it's like, if 90% of the people that walk into your office have a trauma history, yes, you do. And vice versa, like trauma therapists who are like, I don't treat eating disorders. Yet at least 40% of your clients have an eating disorder. Like, can we start treating people as whole humans?
Right.
Right.
It's like the same thing, oh, I treat trauma, but I don't treat dissociation. Yes, you do.
Right.
You just don't know it.
And maybe you're not as helpful as you could be if you chose to treat it and get consultation and training.
Mm-hmm.
True.
Right. This idea that people who have DID are not treatable, the idea that some people with eating disorders are not treatable is garbage. It's not true.
My clients that have DID are the ones that always do their homework and they do it
Yep.
way above and beyond anything I ask.
That has been my experience with folks who have eating disorders also. And certainly you put the two of them together and you definitely have an overachieving superstar client.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they need a lot of pacing and handholding, right, to be able to tolerate the stuff that comes up, including parts of self and how parts of self present as they get to know their system.
Yeah.
But
I think
for
it's
me,
key to remember that these things are developmental in nature.
mm-hmm.
What's the very first developmental milestone? It's trust.
Yeah.
So yeah, there needs to be a lot of handholding in the beginning.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, trust is so important in general, right? Especially if you've never had it.
Yeah.
What does that look like? What does it feel like? Is it going to be there tomorrow?
Exactly.
So there is a lot. I think there's a lot of importance to being a clinician who can be consistent and have clearly defined boundaries. And can we just talk about this for a second?
Oh yes,
If
because
you
you
are,
posted this. Like,
yes,
I know people who are going to be listening to this. Like, it's not going to be the same day, but the post you put today, the Healing My Parts post you put up today about therapeutic boundaries, like, oh, it's so important. So yes, please talk about that because that is so key.
can we talk about this? Right, like. If you are treating somebody who has dissociation, you are going to get communication in between sessions, and you should.
Yes.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
It needs to happen. Like, some of your best information is going to come from that between session communication. It doesn't mean you have to write a 35-page book back every time you get an email from your
Just
client.
thank you for sharing. That's all we need.
Yeah. Thank you. got this. Can't wait to unpack it in session. Thanks for letting, I mean, there's so many different one word things that you can send to somebody. And I really, really appreciate the therapists who are willing to send back that one sentence, because I think for littles in the system, it is transitional.
Yes.
And there are parts of self, right, that don't have object permanence yet. They need to know you still exist.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes. Like this is so key.
Yeah,
You know, I know our littles need that.
Yeah, this trust thing is like the building block for healing, really.
Yeah. I think sometimes I think therapists don't realize how important they are in the lives of their clients, especially clients who have dissociative disorders. It's also fair, right, to say, I can't manage 237 pages every 3 days. Like, I can't do that. It's okay to say, I'm going to need you to limit it to 10 pages. It's okay to say, I need you to limit it to a page a day. It's okay to say you really cannot put like safety issues in those emails.
Yeah.
Like you can have parameters around it, but you have to let people communicate.
Yeah. And it's
Right.
okay to say, we'll read this in our next session.
One of the best things you can do, right? It can be the best, most powerful session ever, because sometimes a client's hearing that information for the first time because they didn't know they sent the email.
Right.
True.
Right. That's always the eye opener in the session where your therapist says, so I got an email, and you're like,
Yeah, did.
hold on, let me check my sent items.
But it came from a different email address because we all have our own email addresses.
Yeah, just so y'all know.
That's amazing. That is also one of the things you notice, like how many email addresses does somebody have?
Yes. We have a lot.
I probably don't have as many because we had some rules around not everybody gets one, but it is kind of amusing when you go like, what email do I put down for this?
Yeah.
I know some
God.
systems out there are like nodding.
Yes.
Well, like the point actually of the post today was about how very often in the beginning therapists are like, yeah, it's fine. Go ahead and email me. It's not a problem. And then it's like a month later, they're mad at you.
Yeah.
And you can tell by the tone
It
of their
was
voice or
really
office.
fine.
Yeah. They didn't think about it or didn't know or don't know how to set the limit. I just think consistency is so important.
Yes,
true.
consistency matters, you know, and knowing where the line is, because we respect it, you know.
Mhm.
And a lot of times, if I know what the boundary is, I'll like shoot, you know, pull that boundary back another foot just so I don't even come close to it.
Yeah, because who wants to overstep a boundary?
Right.
Right? Like nobody.
Mm-hmm.
That feels dangerous.
Yeah.
Right.
And yet everybody wants to preserve the relationship. I mean, I think I'm pretty sure I talked about it in the beginning of when I started the Healing My Parts podcast about a therapist that I had who literally would make fun of her clients who have DID and OSDD, like just so denigrating and snarky about like, oh, I don't even read their emails because they're dissociating. They don't remember sending them anyway. And
That's really sad because like there are some really good gold nuggets that show up in those emails. Things that can't be said out loud face to face.
there's so many things about it that are like so important inside those emails where it can also be a way of a part communicating to the part that is showing up in session who needs to know that information but needs to have your support in learning that information. So if you're just going to throw that away, you're kind of preventing healing from your client, which is like, why are you a therapist if that's
Right.
Thankfully, I don't think that's the majority of therapists, but like listening to that was just horrifying.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Well, and is an hour really enough for everyone to say what they need to say? That's the other thing.
No.
Never. So, yeah.
Yeah,
You blink and the hour is gone.
it is.
So really
fast.
appreciating those that are willing to
Mhm.
do what you need.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I just think it's important that a lot of times with, you know, when you have DID and let alone adding an eating disorder on top of it, like you're probably going to need more than one session per week.
Or at least an extended one.
Right.
True.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about just in general, right, what happens in a session, it's like the first 15 minutes, you've sat down, you've opened your drink, there's been a little bit of small talk. And then if you're going to wrap up at 10 minutes to the hour, you have 30 minutes of work.
Yeah. And that's just not enough time to do meaningful work.
Not remotely.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So trust building and emailing outside of session are helpful.
Yes.
Which leads into our next question. What are some things systems find helpful when learning to manage an eating disorder? And what are some things that are unhelpful?
Oh, the most helpful things, honestly, is the internal communication. Everybody hates that answer because it's like, that's the answer to everything, but it kind of is.
It is the answer to everything.
You know,
You
it's
have
like,
to talk to yourself.
I'm sorry you don't want to hear it. And it's the only way out of this mess.
It's true.
Like parts have to be able, it's some, one of the most motivating things I think is a part that is heavily engaged in eating disorder behaviors that are harmful, right? That are impacting energy levels, fatigue, also physical health of the body. That part that's engaging in those behaviors might be getting the benefit of dissociated feelings and might be able to get the benefit of feeling empowered by the behaviors, but very often is not the part that's around for the fatigue, the irritability, being on the receiving end of people in your life being angry with you or frustrated with you, or having to feel how much the body is aching or hurting. So for that one part who's just like, this is great, I can do whatever I want, I feel great, this is the best answer ever, they're shocked when you can facilitate that information from other parts of self to be able to talk to it, to say, but when you do that, this is what I'm left with.
Yeah.
And I didn't sign up for this. Like, I've already been hard enough in life. And now I'm suffering so much every single day. Like, I'm glad you're getting relief, but there's got to be another way. And can we come together as a team and figure that out?
Right.
So we don't all have to be on islands.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, compromise, cooperation, and the communication are just essential.
Yeah. For people to even, and parts of self to understand where each self is coming from. So you have a self that engages in binging, and one that engages in purging, and another that overexercises, another that restricts, another that's somewhere in between, somebody else that's an orthorex, like so many different things, right? And if there's no communication between parts, it's impossible to start healing all of that stuff. Like, everybody has to come together to make some agreements around keeping the physical body healthy, so that, or healthy enough
Right.
that you can do the work you need to do to heal, and also hopefully be able to do things you enjoy in life.
Right.
Absolutely.
Well, and these behaviors have a reason why they're happening. Like, and if yourselves don't talk to each other, they won't understand or know those stories behind it. I have a part named, and I know I've told this in other podcast episodes, but I have a self named Journey, and she would eat the contents of the fridge. And myself, Lizzie, would be very, very upset at Journey and really hated her. And I used to call her Karen because, she was so annoying. But I didn't understand that the reason why she did that is because she wasn't allowed enough food when we were younger. And so once I understood that, like, I had compassion for her, and I figured out that my restricting was actually setting her off, like triggering her into eating the contents of the fridge, So once we understood that about each other, we were able to come to an agreement, like, I'm not going to do, the restricting thing because that's triggering you, and you don't have to eat the whole contents of the fridge anymore because I'm going to make sure we eat, So it really changed the whole pattern there once I listened to Journey. So
The most beautiful part about that, right? I feel like at the root of all of that is that love and compassion for each other in the system. Like, whether if your system has a host or doesn't have a host, when you're present, you are but a part of the system. like going rogue and making all the decisions because you perceive yourself to be the main one is so disrespectful of all the other parts.
And
So
so
true.
is it when clinicians try to treat somebody as the host or the one or the original.
Yes.
You know, you're the one, and everyone else
And
is
the
just
other
a
selves
part.
don't matter. Yeah.
That's not okay either.
Woo.
Agree.
Like
Yep.
everybody is a part. Everybody belongs. Everybody matters. There is not any self that is more important than another self.
We'll get into the critique of IFS, right? That not everybody has a self with a capital S in a system, or maybe every single solitary part has its own, but that hierarchical system doesn't work. And it's important to respect that and just help build compassion and teamwork amongst everyone in the system so that
having
we
that
can move forward.
egalitarian approach is what helps us personally as Garden System have internal cooperation, because we all matter.
Yeah. That for me has been one of the things that has helped me slow down and actually have all of us do the things that we need to do that are helpful for each other. So we tend to be really good at picking up concepts quickly and teaching them to other people. And then, I have a 13-year-old. He's very vocal, who's like, you think you're going to freaking slow down and maybe actually fucking do it for us? Or you just want to talk about it to other people, because I don't think that's really helpful for us. Followed by, just saying. Like, oh, good point. I guess we do need to actually do this stuff.
Yep. I mean, that is one nice thing that, as lived experience people, we can say to our clients is things like, I'm not ever going to ask you to do something that I haven't already done myself.
Yeah. Yep. And I think that lived experience also can lend itself to really having compassion for how hard it can be to follow through.
It is.
Right. Like it's confusing, or, you're the one that leaves session, but somebody else is in charge as soon as you get home. So it didn't happen, even though you intended it to. And how can you work together? Like really understanding those nuances is so helpful in healing.
Yeah. Hi, dear friends.
We hope you're enjoying the episode so far. We'd love to invite you to join Hearts Multiplied, our private online community for people living with a dissociative disorder, along with separate spaces for clinicians and supporters.
Inside Hearts Multiplied, we host live events just for you, including social hangouts, little story time, teen D&D campaigns, online gaming like Minecraft and Mario Kart, and vibrant message boards on topics like intimacy and OEA.
We also offer a supporters group and a clinical consultation group for therapists working with dissociative clients.
And we Garden System facilitate 8-week peer coaching groups where we work on internal communication and personalized healing goals.
To learn more and sign up, visit acoupleofmultiples.com. We'd love to have you.
So, for our next question, how can clinicians best combine treatments for eating disorders and dissociative disorders?
I think that really learning how to deliver care simultaneously. So when you're looking at a person who's a system, you have to kind of stop thinking in the singular. So you're sort of always delivering group and family therapy. You might be talking to one aspect of the family system or the group, but you have to consider how every single thing you're delivering is going to be perceived and received by other parts. So that means it's really important to get to know all of the parts in the system. And at the same time, you have to do the triaging of when somebody is really acute, right? Like there are just times that you need to have basically medical management plans in place. So today, the answer isn't always to just send somebody to a higher level of care, right? Like, oh, I'm worried about their lab work. I'm worried about, their physical status. Like they need to go inpatient ASAP, because many of the inpatient settings are incredibly harmful for systems. And we don't have a lot of them. That can really manage DID in a way that's strengths-based and that's compassionate and helpful. So can you have a plan in place to know what to do if somebody's electrolytes are low? Is there a way that they can get the replenishments of electrolytes? And it doesn't necessarily mean sending them to the ER. Do you have a doctor who can work with a home care agency that can provide an IV in home if somebody needs potassium or sodium, right? Like those things have to be in place, because sometimes you have to do work slower than you want to, right, in order for it to be accepted by the system. So there can be rules of thumbs around eating disorders, like, oh, we're always working for adequacy and then consistency and then variety. Like that's a great scaffold. You don't have to necessarily follow it that way, but it's generally works the best for the vast majority of people. But depending on who's in the system, you might not be able to do that fast enough. So the more you can think out of the box, bearing in mind who's going to react to what in which way.
Yeah.
So it's, I can deliver this intervention around how do I increase somebody's intake, like in general. For example, with a person who is a singlet, pretty good at helping them get refed. But their tolerance and distress tolerance is different than a system, because we're only working with oneself.
Right.
So you can accommodate for that self, versus if there is some acuity at play and it's we need to get X, Y, or Z in order to stabilize a physical body, you got to figure out what part's holding the most severe behavior and what do you need to do to keep that part safe and help it move aside a little bit or go someplace safe in the inner world, and who can come in to take care of it. And when they are taking care of it, can they make a choice that's acceptable enough to the part that you asked to move aside in case it comes back too soon, so that it doesn't undo what you just did, basically.
Yeah, I think this just really speaks very clearly to the importance of system mapping, getting to know all selves, and even mapping the internal world out, because where are they going to tuck in if you don't know what's in the internal world?
Yes. And how each client shares that with their therapist is certainly up to them. If it's pictures, inviting them in, descriptions, or some people I feel like are so open and it's like, look at all these things that I put together and it's amazing. And you feel like you're right there with your clients. And other systems are so much more private. And it's like, I can tell you the areas.
And that's okay.
Yep.
Absolutely. So
what are some common myths about food and eating in general that are detrimental to those living with a dissociative disorder?
Oh God, the same ones that are detrimental to every single solitary last one of us. Like, carbs are not the devil. Like I just feel like it's, now I've been on the planet long enough where I just see these myths about food in general just kind of cycling around. It depends. Like the diet du jour might be low fat, low carb, low protein, and then it's the exact opposite 2 years later. Don't eat this, don't eat that. Here's the thing. All foods break down into the same 3 macros. All foods break down into fatty acids, amino acids, and glucose. Every single last one of them. Your brain doesn't know the difference. Your body doesn't necessarily know the difference. Yeah, there's differences in micronutrients, but your body's always going to prioritize macros. There's nothing wrong with convenience foods. They feed people. They keep us on the planet. Like, we absolutely have to stop demonizing foods and allow people to eat what they have available to them and the things that they like, and know that their bodies know what to do with food. Their bodies know how to convert it to energy. There is nothing wrong with eating in relation to your feelings. And you need to have more than just one trick in your bag, right? If all you ever do in relation to your feelings is eat, arguably you can use some more skills. But there's a reason why in any training that I give to group practitioners who are not eating disorder specialists, if I say, how many of you have comfort foods, 100% of the hands go up. Like, it's fine. Some of the most helpful literature out there is on health at every size and intuitive eating. It gives you some freedom from people who spend a lot of money creating insecurities in you just so you will buy their products and programs. And I think folks with dissociative disorders are particularly prone to that because they have really vulnerable parts that are not media savvy. And if they're the ones that are getting in front of some of that messaging, they don't know how to break it down the same way other parts of a system might.
So I want to ask some extra questions here because there's a lot of chatter happening in my head right now. Mainly the littles are like, oh, so if all food breaks down to the same three things, that means we can eat a Snickers bar every day and nothing else, right? And like,
So if you go with the principles of intuitive eating, you could say, go ahead and try that and let's see how we feel. Because what happens is people will say, oh, I can have, that means I can, invariably, usually it's donuts. They'll say, I can eat donuts all day long and nothing else. Well, part of intuitive eating is, yes, have whatever you want, and then use your experience to shape your next choices. I guarantee you, if you have a Snickers bar every day and nothing else, you're not going to feel very good. So your energy level is not going to be really great. And when you're sitting there without the energy to do some of the things that you really like doing, like maybe going to Disney and riding roller coasters, and you're like, oh crap, I'm way too tired to do that because all I've had today is a Snickers bar, then you start seeing the value in some of the other foods that are available, right? Similarly, people will say, I'm just going to eat donuts and cake all day. And when they actually try it, and sometimes truly they do, like when people truly say, I'm removing all food rules, usually people experience chaotic eating because they have had so many rules in place for so long. Like that's normal. Expect a couple of weeks and even a month or so of chaotic eating until you and your body trusts you to truly have what you want when you want it. And then you're really beginning to learn things like, you know what, when I eat donuts all day, I feel like crap. I
mhm.
have insulin rushes and crashes, my energy levels in the toilet, and I'm really grumpy and I'm not a lot of fun to be around. And I get a stomach ache by the end of the day. I don't think I want to feel like that anymore. Great learning experience.
I like
Like you're
that.
organically finding out what's working for you.
And so then my next question too is when you think about like the whole idea of intuitive eating, right? But how well can we trust our own bodies, especially when we live in a society with all the chemicals and all the extra added addictive sugars in all of the foods? Like how do I know if I'm hungry versus I'm addicted to something?
So understanding hunger cues and hunger signals is really important to begin with, right? So many times when I ask people, how do you know if you're hungry? People will say my stomach growls. But generally, if you ask any dietitian, if somebody says like they're hungry when their stomach growls, they will say, oh, they've waited too long. Like you should be eating before your stomach growls. So subtle hunger cues are things like being lightheaded, being tired, thinking about food, lack of concentration, irritability, headaches, that sort of thing. And we should be eating in relation to those cues first.
Mm-hmm.
But we tend to overthink things in general. You know, I can't tell you how overthought hunger is. Somebody has breakfast and 3 hours later they think they're hungry and then they look at the clock and go, oh yeah, no, no, no. I had breakfast at 7. It's only 9:30. I can't be hungry. Nope, not going to eat. Well, everybody's had a cup of coffee for breakfast for the most part too. And if they have to pee at 9:30, nobody's going, oh no, I can't possibly have to pee. I'm going to hold this for another like 2 hours because that's too soon. Like we totally overthink our hunger cues. So I lost myself in that whole like train of thought.
But that was
I know there was something else I was going to say about that. Oh, the sugar addiction stuff.
Yeah.
You know, the literature on that is really sort of mixed. Like I've listened to people and seen research that shows that that's not the case, and I've listened to and seen research that shows that that is the case.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to intuitive eating, one thing that we know is that bodies are highly adaptable. We've been on the planet for many, 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 many years. And the human body is really good at evolving. The most important thing that you can do is pay attention to how foods make you feel. If you find yourself constantly obsessed with one food, thinking about it all the time, you can never have enough, and you're also irritable and it's not helpful to you, yeah, you might want to think about taking a break to see if you feel better.
Mm-hmm.
But realistically, if you're paying attention to your body and you're in your body, you can begin to feel the differences between this is hungry and empty, this is I could use a snack, this is I'm not hungry anymore, this is I probably have room for jello, and this is I'm stuffed. Like you start to learn the gradations of your own physical body and where you feel your most energetic, emotionally stable, sleeping well self.
Okay, and one more on this entire topic here. So, like, and I can't believe I didn't think to add this in when we were creating these questions, but people with metabolic disorders, particularly polycystic ovarian syndrome, like I
Mhm.
think of clients I've had previously, and think of my own experiences too with PCOS, and medical advice and dietary advice based off of all of these things. Like how does this all play a role when it comes to eating disorders and things like PCOS, where there's a lot of recommendations about what
Yeah.
you should or should not be eating with that.
Yeah, I think that goes into a lot of other sort of metabolic disorders and even autoimmune illnesses and diseases, right? There's a lot of guidance around how you should eat. If you have diabetes, if you have autoimmune diseases like lupus, MS, if you have Lyme disease, like there's diet guidance out there for pretty much everything.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think that goes back to how your own specific body is going to respond. Like there's some reality if you're somebody with diabetes, right? You have to pay attention to your blood glucose levels
Mm-hmm.
because that's exceptionally dangerous if you don't. So your parameters around intuitive eating are going to look somewhat different than somebody who doesn't have to pay attention to that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know of folks who have MS who have tried the Walls diet and have gotten unbelievable progress in their symptoms, like where they, not progress, remission in their symptoms, where they feel amazing. On the flip side, I know people who have tried it and gotten worse.
Right.
But I think the most important thing is that we learn to really tune into what is truly working for us as individuals, because all of our biologies are different.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I share this publicly, like everybody knows that I've had an eating disorder, sort of multiple iterations of that with different parts internally. And I also have late stage Lyme disease. So I've had plenty of, and also SIRS, which was related to toxic mold exposure. So I got so much dietary advice around that. And what I discovered was when I was really symptomatic with a lot of neurological symptoms, like lots of numbness, tingling, twitching, that kind of like tremors, that changing my diet to decrease inflammation was remarkably helpful in my physical symptoms and my physical recovery. And it nearly reignited my eating disorder,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what restriction does. And at this point in my life, I have enough information that I could start to see what was happening with my thought process, that there was fear that started to get attached to certain foods, which doesn't make any sense. Like, why am I afraid of a food?
Mm-hmm.
Then it was like, oh, right, because this is what restriction will do. And while this got my inflammation down enough to get some improvement in symptoms, it's igniting that pathway in the brain that likes symmetry, that likes rules, and that gets me into a lot of trouble. So the decisions, right, that I have to make in that situation are going to be the ones that are good for me. They might not work the same way for other people, but for me, it's like, I don't want to end up in hospitals again with severe anorexia. Like, I'm good. Been there, done that so many times. If I end up with lifelong tremors and I don't know, maybe that's what happens, but I've got to eat. I've got to change how I eat. And lo and behold, my inflammation had gotten down enough that
Mm-hmm.
it's fine. Well, I still have Lyme disease symptoms, but it's we have to get to that place where we can block out the static of media and the static of popular media and fad diets. And sometimes, honestly, like even getting second opinions from medical professionals, like, what are my options? I need to know all of my options. And what if this doesn't work for me for psychological reasons? What are my options?
I think
And
that's
make the best
great.
choice for you.
I think that's great to bring up. One of the things that came up recently with the Florida board is clinicians being brought before the board with complaints of they were giving dietary advice kind of outside of the scope of practice, right? And so I think that's something as we're talking about eating disorders and talking about these myths that we have to remind, are we working within our scope of practice? And I'm really
Yep.
thinking about clients who were given advice by endocrinologists and then they're in the eating disorder treatment program and they're just throwing the entire thing out the window what the medical doctor told them. And I think that could be dangerous too.
Yeah. I think it's really hard for folks who are not sure how to triage for themselves. How do I figure out what's okay for me? I think it's really complicated when you have DID, right? Because I don't know about you guys, but I mean, I have a part that is allergic to a food and another part that can eat that food with no
Yep.
problem. And so it is really hard to figure out what, like, is this really okay? Like, sometimes to figure things out, I have to approach it multiple times depending on who's fronting.
Yeah, and I think that's important for medical doctors to hear too, is that different cells will have different allergies. Different cells will react to foods differently. Different cells will have different blood sugar levels, different blood pressure levels. Like, these things change based on who is fronting.
Yep. And I don't think that's commonly known.
It's not. So maybe we need to send this to all the medical doctors and endocrinologists too. So, what resources, treatment centers, or therapeutic opportunities are out there that can assist plural systems that are experiencing issues around eating?
I'll give you a few plugs out to the nonprofits because they think we all do a really good job at helping people get to where they need to go. So the one that I lead is MEDA, the Multi-Service Eating Disorders Association. Info at medainc.org is a great place to go if you are looking for referrals or places to start. Project Heal is an incredible organization that does a lot of free assessments, triaging, and can help people hook up to free treatment. And they're very DID friendly. National Alliance for Eating Disorders is another one that has a helpline that's staffed by clinicians. They have a phenomenal number of just free support groups for people, and they are very, very DID friendly. So these are all places that you can call and say, I'm a system and this is what I need. And then for regional ones, Rock Recovery, Eating Disorder Foundation, there are a number of them. If folks go to the CEDO website, which is the Collaborative of Eating Disorder Organizations, you'll see a bunch of them there. And that way we can thoughtfully pair people to a potential treatment center if they need that level of care. Because sometimes it's somebody needs, for example, a lot of focus on OCD and an eating disorder. So we might go, you know what, Rogers would be a great place for you. Another person might have a very complicated life and really needs to remain in the home, but is really, really pretty acute. Within Health is a great option. So it's just knowing where these folks might be best matched. Easy place to go are the organizations.
That's awesome.
Those sound like great resources.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what are the reasons many treatment centers and inpatient programs for eating disorders refuse to admit clients that also have DID, and how helpful or harmful is this practice?
Oh, I was just having a conversation last night with Beauty After Bruises around the lack of treatment centers, right, for folks with DID. The reason that I hesitate when I answer that question, right, is because we all want the answer to be like, of course, it's incredibly harmful to exclude people who have DID. And it's also incredibly harmful to admit somebody with DID if you have no freaking idea what to do with the person, right? And you're going to just actually create treatment trauma.
Yes.
So it's such a mixed bag. I think there are definitely some treatment centers for eating disorders anyway that are more and more capable of handling folks with DID. I know Galen Hope does, Within Health does, and some other ones as well. River Oaks is another one. Dominion is another one that will do like DID and eating disorders. But there's not a lot.
Unfortunately, there's not. So, how can eating disorder programs better accommodate those living with the dissociative disorder?
Truthfully, the very first thing that I'm so vocal about this too, the very first thing that all treatment centers need to do is learn about DID and OSDD, how it works, what it looks like, and what treatment really looks like. Because treatment isn't, as you all know, right? It's not about let's make this person be one person and get rid of all their parts. Like that's not treatment. It's not care. It's also not care to say your littles are not allowed to come out, or that you can only talk through like your adult self. That is so incredibly disrespectful, traumatic, like every negative adjective you can think of. There's nothing helpful about that.
No.
Really beginning to see people who are multiple as multiple, get to know every single part that you can. It is an honor if a part comes out and talks with you.
Right. And littles are not always like super immature or anything like that. Sometimes littles are the gatekeepers, and that's the one you need to talk to if anything's going to happen.
I think you were the one that explained it so well. I'm pretty sure you were the one that said a 5-year-old part is not necessarily 5 years old. They've been 5 for like 40 years.
Correct.
Wasn't that you that said that?
Yep, I said that.
Such a good quote. I actually quoted it at the Meta conference. It's like, because people don't think, they're like, oh, you're 5 years old, like you can't leave, like we need an adult part to come back because you can't drive. It's like, not necessarily.
All my littles drive. They all drive.
Yep.
Sucking their thumb, driving down the road.
Like,
that's us.
Hi, Blossom. Got her finger in her mouth and the steering wheel.
One of my favorite, I think it was two years ago at the Healing Together conference, when Holly Crumpler was she was presenting with her family. And I think it was Grady, her husband, who was like, and then we came in and Susie, her 6-year-old part, was doing our taxes.
Yep.
It was so good.
Hey, sometimes they're a little more joyful when doing not so joyful things. So, hey.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that people who are not used to treating folks who have DID need to understand. Like, stop being so literal about the ages of different parts. If a 6-year-old is doing the taxes, it doesn't mean that the person is faking. It means the 6-year-old knows how to do the taxes.
That's right.
That's right.
You know, and that's the weird thing is like they're 6. And so, yeah, they're going to behave like a 6-year-old behaves in many ways, but they're not.
Like what they know doesn't equate to that.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Because they've been in the body a long, long, long time. They learn things.
Yes.
And there are littles that are not necessarily up to speed. You know, they haven't been out and experiencing life as long as some of the others. So you got to remember that too.
Mm-hmm.
I swear to God, I have a 2.5-year-old part that's like a convicted felon with a pet raccoon. Not really somebody you want running around in public. But yet I have a 5-year-old part that could negotiate literal peace treaties. Like she's...
Yeah. That sounds right.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the more people can learn, it's so hard because there isn't like a go-to place where you can get all that you need as a clinician. So like being able to know what's around. And I think the work that the two of you are doing is so important for people, for clinicians and folks with lived experience to go to get information. There's not tons of places.
We got to create them. That's just kind of where it was at. Looking around, if it's not there, somebody's got to make it. And so
let's do it.
Yep.
You just do it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, the next question is kind of something we already touched on. I have a feeling this is going to be another repeat answer. How can a system navigate having specific selves that have eating behaviors that affect the entire body and other selves?
Yeah, it's all back to that communication thing, right?
Yep, I'm like, we're gonna really drill this in for everyone.
You have to talk to the other selves in your system. You can't pretend that they're not there. You can't kill them off. You can't do any of those things. You've got to work with them.
You can't keep going rogue and pretend that nobody else in the system is going to be impacted or affected by it. It's so funny because when Rachel and I were presenting last year on I think we did like 6 common scenarios, right, that systems typically run into. Afterwards, I was like scrolling through the comments and literally somebody wrote like, let me guess, the answer to this one is internal communication. It's like, sorry guys.
Yeah. So like looking at my next question here, how can a system navigate selves that refuse to eat?
But I mean, some of it is also like, yes, there's internal communication, but can we help people by giving them some scripts that they can use and some ideas, right? So like for a part that refuses to eat, can you sit down with that part and describe how you as a part are impacted physically, emotionally, and socially by that part's refusal to eat? Because if, for example, let's say you're a teen part and you really enjoy going out with your friends and your friends really do enjoy going out to dinner, and that part is often co-conscious with you and won't allow you to eat, you're having a lousy time while you're going out with your friends, and it's impacting your friendships because honestly, when you go out with people and there's a person at the table who's not participating, it kind of puts a damper on the group. So it does impact the quality of your social relationships and helping the parts understand things like that. Like, this is really important to me. So I get that you don't want to be taking in this food or this kind of food. So we have an amazing swimming pool and fire pit and outdoor movie theater in the inner world. Like, maybe you could go watch fill in the blank movie and bring so and so in our system who is great to hang out with you, and spend the time there while I go out and take care of this. And the part might say no because I don't trust you. And then you can say, okay, well, how about I show you the menu? And maybe we can take a look at some stuff, and can we negotiate? But that's how you can start to make this stuff work.
Yeah.
Setting alarms, remind yourself to eat if you have a part that doesn't remember.
True.
Yeah.
Or can't feel your body or doesn't have a body.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Mm-hmm.
All right, we got a few more important questions we got to get through here.
All right.
Okay.
How can different selves with different ideas and goals for body weight and shape find common ground?
By making sure that every part understands what health at every size is, and understanding that the physical body has a place genetically that it's going to land, while simultaneously affirming each part's physical appearance in the inner world. I honestly really find putting mirrors in your inner world to be really effective. So when a part looks at an outer world mirror and sees itself and freaks out, because let's just say that part is, like, the three of us are all assigned female at birth, right? So say we have a male part that has purple hair and it looks in the mirror, and in my case sees a blonde middle-aged woman and is like really disoriented and upset. If it goes into the inner world and has a mirror that it can look in and see the reflection of its male self with its purple hair, it can exhale.
I don't know. All my parts went hell no when you said that.
I know. I think mirrors can be really triggering for a lot of selves and people in general.
It depends on what works and how upset each part is, right? So if you have a part that's gender dysphoric all the time, it can really benefit that part to reassure itself that it is, in fact, whatever gender it's identifying as. If a mirror on the flip side is triggering because internal parts have eating disorders or insecurities or are afraid of their physical body, those wouldn't be parts that I would recommend would use an inner mirror. So it's like being strategic about it. You can also have mirrors that appear and disappear, right, as needed.
I
like the disappearing idea. Like,
yeah, that's what's cool about internal worlds. You could basically put whatever the heck you want in there and have it do whatever you want.
Yeah. I have a 17-year-old part that gets really, really reactive to external world mirrors because she looks really different. And obviously she is not my age. So
we're old. Oh my God. It's like that movie.
Yes.
Friday. I look like the Crypt.
Crypt keeper.
Oh, what happened to the skin down? Like, what is this? Yeah. But, for her, being able to go and look in the mirror and see herself, I can actually feel the physical release of tension. I have another part who has a really serious eating disorder, has been dormant on like another level of the inner world. She's not really somebody that I would want to be looking in a mirror.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I think you should ask that next because it just flows better.
Okay. What does health at every size really mean?
So health at every size, people get it confused all the time, right? Because people think health at every size means healthy at every size, but that's actually not what it says. So health at every size is truly more like a civil rights movement. It's really talking about ensuring that everyone has, at the very least, equitable access to things that will optimize the health of their individual body. Because unfortunately, the healthcare system is filled with anti-fat bias. For those who are not familiar with that term, think fat phobia and weight stigma. So you see people who are coming into doctors' offices with concerns, and they live in a larger body, and without having any testing or any type of objective examination, they're told to lose weight. And so I have so many stories. There's actually one on the Meta website. There's a video of a woman who will talk to you about how she spent 3 nights in the bathroom curled up in the fetal position in intractable pain because she was afraid the doctor would tell her it was something that she ate. She needed her gallbladder out. We have stories of people who had difficulty breathing, right? And they were told for weeks on end they needed to lose weight. In fact, they had pulmonary edema, and that wasn't discovered until they were in the ICU. And sometimes, people will dismiss that, but I always use myself as an example because I happen to have thin privilege genetically. And so when I had difficulty breathing with COVID and I went into the ER, I literally was given an immediate IV, an EKG, 2 sets of lab work. I had a chest CT and a chest X-ray.
Which would not have been given to somebody in a larger body.
Same exact symptoms, completely different healthcare. So when we think about health at every size, we're talking about every body, shape or size should be able to walk into a doctor's office and have their complaints investigated, and they should get the same care. Reagan Chastain is hilarious. And she, if you just go to reaganchastain.com, I believe that's her website, she has so much information on this stuff. And she tells stories about having bronchitis, right? And getting in an argument with her doctor and eventually having to say, well, what do you do for thin people with bronchitis? For him to say, oh, I give them antibiotics. And she had to say, like, well, let's start there.
Yeah.
Nobody should have to do that.
Right.
So how do we optimize health? Like gentle movement, gentle nutrition, equitable health care. That's really what health at every size is about.
That's good to know. Good to get that cleared up. So, all right. So I have one, we're almost to our very end here. I have one question here that I think is really important to think about, like, especially when you have DID and you have a lot of selves that have a hard time eating or cannot eat for many traumatic potential, reasons, which I won't go into details for, and looking at the options to fix that, right? So, what are the pros and cons of using feeding tubes when clients have both DID and eating disorders? And how does it impact their ability to access treatment?
Oh, it is not easy to access treatment when you have a feeding tube. It greatly limits places that you can go and people who can care for you. And I am in the camp of feeding tubes being a last resort. For folks. There are complications that can happen with feeding tubes, and it depends on what type of feeding tube we're talking about. Are we talking about an NG tube? Are we talking about a PEG tube? Are we talking about a J tube? There's all different types of things that can happen in terms of infections, and you can have all sorts of different complications. That said, for some folks who are having extreme difficulties like swallowing or having anything in their mouths for trauma-related reasons, it can be a way of buying time until that can get worked out through the system and keep somebody healthy enough. And in those cases, very often, like ambulatory NG tubes end up being the tube of choice, and you teach somebody how to flush their own tube and how to hook up their feedings as long as they're capable of doing that. So you have to make sure that a system is functioning well enough that they can follow the instructions of what type of formula and how to put it in the feeding pump, how to hook themselves up, how to flush the tube. It can be really beneficial. It's also not comfortable. So people have to think about the fact that when you are simply recommending a tube because you're like, oh, like oral eating is really challenging for you and swallowing is hard for trauma-related reasons, let's just bypass that with a tube. Feeding tubes are physically uncomfortable, they're invasive, and they have their own trauma triggers attached to them.
That's a lot of good information there. I think my heart just breaks because knowing somebody who decided to get the feeding tube and now cannot participate in the eating disorder program, and it just kind of blows my mind, like we're trying to stay alive here.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't know many outpatient programs that will take a tube, like inpatient programs. Usually, like inpatient medical will because of the liability involved in managing the tube. But somebody with a tube, I would encourage them to look at, inquire within health. They tend to be the most flexible, and they do have DID knowledge.
Okay. Well, that's good information. Thank you so much.
That's a hard situation.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Well, this has been a great conversation. Lots of good information.
It's been fun. Thank you so much for having me. And it's obviously a topic I like chatting about.
How can people connect with you?
We're on Instagram at Healing My Parts. We have our podcast, Healing My Parts, and on Substack, we're Healing My Parts, substack.com. So as long as you remember Healing My Parts, if you Google it, you probably will find me.
Yep.
Or if you're eating disorder specific, you can find me at Meta also, which is metainc.org.
Awesome.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your experience and insight. This conversation about eating disorders and multiplicity is one that's often missing from the broader dialogue, and we're so grateful to you for helping create space for it.
We know that healing looks different for every system, and your voice is a powerful reminder that recovery can be plural, nuanced, and deeply compassionate.
We'll link to the Healing My Parts podcast in the show notes for anyone who wants to follow your work.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And thank you for hanging out with a trio of multiples.
This episode is brought to you by Donna Earle, a licensed professional counselor and certified clinical trauma professional.
She's the founder of To Life Counseling in Southlake, Texas, where she helps individuals ages 17 and up heal trauma, navigate identity, and reclaim inner peace. Her trauma-informed approach includes EMDR, parts work, strengths-based therapy, TBRI, and CBT.
She's passionate about honoring the resilience of the human spirit, one story at a time.
The Institute for Creative Mindfulness, ICM, soon to be the Creative Mindfulness Network, is the only EMDR therapy training program founded by an openly plural clinician, EMDR therapy author Dr. Jamie Plus Marich.
We felt so validated when we were able to authentically participate in this training as Garden System. And although grounded in the EMDR International Association for Curriculum Standards, ICM elevates the values of lived experience and the expressive arts in their training programs.
They actively work with shattering the stigma around dissociative responses. Please visit www.instituteforcreativemindfulness.com to learn more.
Thank you, dear friends, for spending time with us today.
We're so grateful for each of you and all the important work you're doing. Whether it's supporting others or navigating your own healing journey, we hope this episode brought insight, encouragement, and something new to consider.
If it did, we'd love for you to share it with a friend, your therapist, psychiatrist, or colleagues. It's one more step toward changing how the world understands DID.
And just a quick reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for therapy. Listening does not create a therapeutic relationship with the hosts or any guest speakers.
Until next time, take gentle care and thank you for hanging out with
a couple of multiples.